Hi everyone, it's Alex and I'm back for another movie battle here. This time we're gonna go way back in time to the time of silver screens. Oh, those were the days. Of course, if you guys know, especially for those who watch my Tim Burton films, you know that he inspired me to get into the whole monster movie, horror movie genre. And boy, we got two classics right here. We're gonna review Frankenstein and Dracula, both released in 1931 and have since then become absolute classics in not just the world of horror, but in the world of cinema as well. And in 2014, Showtime decided to launch a brand new horror TV show named Penny Dreadful, starring Eva Green, Timothy Dalton, Reeve Carney, Billy Piper, and much, much more. Alex, what are you doing? Well, I thought because Penny Dreadful is a celebration of both Frankenstein and Dracula, plus the picture of Dorian Gray, I thought this would be sensible to put in your review. Well, yeah, but why are you dressed like that? Well, you know, black lace, it's very Vanessa Ives. Okay, you're telling me that you're going to try and look like Eva Green? Okay, honey, you would have to go to Mars and back to get anywhere close to looking like Eva Green. Okay, I get your point. No, actually, rephrase that. You're gonna have to go all the way to Neptune and back to remotely look like her. Well, at least I'm making more of an effort than you in your Edward Scissorhands pajamas. What is wrong with my Edward Scissorhands pajamas? They're yours as well. Yeah, okay, we can go on all night. Okay, look, please, just let me do this. I mean, come on, it's our favorite TV show. I mean, like, #1 favorite TV show. I have to talk about it. Okay, fine. So you're gonna let me do this review as planned. None of the information from Penny Dreadful, like actors, the way they've written the characters, the imagery, none of that will, make a difference to your reviews. You're gonna talk about the reviews, these two movies exactly the way they were, and, as an added bonus, just add how they portrayed these in the Penny Dreadful series. It's just to get my, love of the show out there. Okay, fine, fair enough, okay. Well, let's have a movie battle of Frankenstein versus Dracula, with the additional bonus of Penny Dreadful. Enjoy! Now, of course, let's start with the most iconic images in these two movies, the monsters. I know I should really start with the main male leads in these, but honestly, we just want to get to the monsters, okay? They're the real things that make this movie, right? Of course, these two have become such iconic images in the world of monsters, and pretty much when anyone hears the word monster, these are pretty much two figures that pretty much come to mind. Dracula, of course, was played by Bela Lugosi, and is pretty much his most passionate role. I mean, hell, he pretty much wanted to be buried in the cave. And he's still immortal now. Kind of scary. The Frankenstein monster, on the other hand, was portrayed by Boris Karloff, and both do fantastic performances that, honestly, it's very hard to judge them on just the performances. But let's look about the characters. While both these monsters are very, very different from each other, Dracula is pretty much knows what he's doing, is very elegant, speaks well, and is generally a power-hungry maniac. And that's quite interesting. In fact, one of the things that I absolutely love about Dracula is the fact that he's not exactly as tragic as other monsters have come to know. I mean, most of the time we see a lot of monsters portrayed as very tragic characters because of their circumstances. Whereas Dracula, you can either play it either way. He's very happy with his life, or just knows exactly what he's doing and will do anything to get it. The only other version that has actually tried to give the character some tragedy is the Gary Oldman version in the 90s, which, as you guys might know, is on my most hated films list, so let's not go there. I think the thing that really just did it for me was the fact that they did make him tragic. The thing about Dracula that makes him so great is just the power that he has. I mean, look at Bela Lugosi. All he has to do is walk down the stairs and stare at the camera, and that's it. You're pretty much weak in the knees at that point. In fact, actually, a lot of women during the time were quite turned on by his performance, not even joking, which is probably where a lot of people associate the theme of sex with the Dracula story, or any vampire story for that matter. Well, Dracula, on the other hand, is a little bit different, because I think as far as, while there's definitely certain characters from the Frankenstein story and the picture of Dorian Gray, Dracula's a little different. I mean, sure, we've got some supporting characters like Mina, and we've had a bit of a mention of Jonathan Harker, but as far as Dracula goes, the vampires, they're not that seen that much. In fact, actually, this really does tie into the book, because Dracula, for most of the part, is hardly ever seen. And that's true of the movie as well. I think what really decides it for me for Dracula is, well, to me, I think Dracula is represented by the devil in Penny Dreadful. I know that eventually we come across a twist with how the vampires and the devil kind of connect and everything, but in some cases, the themes of Dracula transport itself to the original story, which is about the devil trying to take over Vanessa Ives. I think the thing that does it for me is that Dracula is a story of an unknown thing, just somewhere around you. He is a vampire who comes over to England, and there's this horrible presence in the air. It's sort of like he's described as some sort of disease. And that's pretty much what the devil does in Penny Dreadful. He's constantly around Vanessa, and there's always that atmosphere, and you never exactly know if he's right there or not. I really love the fact that sometimes the devil actually plays as other characters in the story, and the audience members don't even notice until he says who he is. In that case, it makes you pretty more shocked and even more terrified when you find out it's him. And also, I think the thing that also makes the devil kind of like Dracula is the desire of sexuality. Yes, Penny Dreadful definitely explores the theme of sexuality a lot, and this does come in the character of Vanessa Ives. I really like the episode named Closer Than Sisters. It really shows the difference between her and Mina, and why the devil would be interested in Vanessa. It is a very fascinating story, but anyway, not much relating to actual characters in Dracula, but the themes of the book and the movie are definitely there. Frankenstein monster, on the other hand, is very, very different. He is basically a newborn and doesn't know how to talk, doesn't really know how society works, and pretty much he's a doomed man from the start just because of his appearance. But to be honest, and I know I might be cheating here, he's very, very different from the book. In fact, actually, Alex might explain the Frankenstein monster a little bit better from the book, so go ahead. However, I think what decides it to me is the fact that Boris Karloff really transforms the monster into pretty much the character that we all know. I mean, he is very different from the book, but honestly, to me, I think it's for the better. The fact is that he is a newborn. He doesn't know how to communicate properly, and most of the horrible things that he does, it's purely out of misunderstanding and by accident. In fact, I really love that he does play the fact that he generally feels sorry and just doesn't understand what he's doing. In fact, that really makes the monster really tragic, and we just feel for him a lot even when the mob is coming after him. Now, the way that they portray the Frankenstein monster in Penny Dreadful is kind of a mixture of the movie's portrayal and the book's portrayal as well. You see, in the book, the monster is very intelligent. He basically learned from observing the family in the cabin in the woods, and then also learned the academic language from Victor Frankenstein's notes. which is a little bit weird on how he can verbally still speak, but you know, that's beside the point. In Penny Dreadful, the actor portraying him, and I love the way that they wrote him, is that he's both the innocent and the misunderstood creature that we're used to from the Boris Karloff production, but he's also very intelligent and even persuades Victor Frankenstein, or threatens even, to create an immortal mate, much like he does in the book. I think the other thing that I really like about the monster and the way that he was written is that you pretty much follow the monster. He pretty much has his own story, his own separate story. He does interact with the other characters, mainly Victor Frankenstein and then later Vanessa Ives in season 2, but you mainly follow only him as part of the episode. I think what I like about this is that it really isolates him from the group and just kind of makes you feel a little bit more sympathy for him because of the way he is. And much like the movie and the book, everything that happens to him is just, well, it's tragic because of the way he looks, so he's pretty much doomed from the start. However, this monster does make a little bit use of himself by actually becoming an employee in certain businesses. The first one is at a theatre, and then the second one is at a wax museum. References to House of Wax much. But anyway, that's beside the point. What I like about these two different jobs is that in some ways they both portray certain themes of the Frankenstein story. The theatre, of course, is where, in fact, even Caliban, who is the monster's name, even brings up the fact that these actors, every night on stage, they die, and then suddenly they're a different character, you know, on a different night. So basically, actors are resurrected all the time, and that's pretty much the monster. The second one in the Wax Museum, of course, referencing to the story of House of Wax, is the fact that most of the models are serial killers, murderers, and mostly victims. This, of course, relates to the monster, as again, they are brought back to life and pretty much made to suffer. And that's the monster's journey. So I really like how these two jobs really tie into the themes of the monster, and if you ask me, the performance of the monster is brilliant. I like that they both show the intelligence, the innocence, and the tragedy of this character. I think in the end, even though Bela Lugosi is fantastic as Dracula, I think Boris Karloff's monster really took this character to just a different direction, honestly, a great direction. So that's what we're going with. And the fact that he delivers it with no dialogue is quite impressive. So that's what we're going with. But what about our other main leads? Let's look at Dr. Victor Frankenstein, or Henry Frankenstein, as he's called in the movie, versus Renfield. Okay, I think with Renfield, the reason why I say he's the other main lead is because he's the man who walks into the Dracula castle and pretty much, you know, we see him actually encounter Dracula at the start of the movie, and then of course he goes through the change throughout it. Most of the people would say that the other male lead is probably Dr. Van Helsing, and while he is an interesting character, I felt he was more of a supporting character. You know, just saying. Of course, Renfield does go through, well, a jarring change from the start, and this is one of the most fascinating things about the character, and one of the things I absolutely love watching from the Dracula movie. I love to see that, you know, from what he looks like at the beginning of the movie, before he entered the Dracula's castle, and then afterwards. And even though we slightly know what happened to him, they still keep it vague, so maybe back in the time, the audience had no idea what happened to him. Who knows? But the performance is absolutely great, and it's pretty much interesting. There's not a specific Renfield in the story, however, if I'm gonna look at it really closely, I see Renfield in two characters in Penny Dreadful. The first one is Fenton, which is a very young boy who is sadly transformed into a vampire and is found wandering around in the zoo and is pretty much chained up in the basement of Sir Malcolm's house. And yeah, he's pretty much just gone already. I mean, I think the thing that makes him seem like Renfield is just the madness and the fact that he always knows when his master is around. He says his master is everywhere. It just sort of felt like a Renfield scene to me. The other character that I believe sort of resembles him is Evelyn Poole, which is a character that has a few scenes in season 1 but really becomes a full character in season 2. And I won't dare spoil like who she is or what she is, but the thing that really, but I will say that she is in a pact with the devil. She is a faithful servant to the devil, but the reason why she is in the first place is because she wants eternal youth, which is pretty much what Renfield wants, is immortality. I mean, well, that's what I get, but I don't know. So I think that kind of resembles it, but only a tiny bit. I mean, the rest of it, yeah. Henry Frankenstein, on the other hand, I don't know why they changed the name to Henry, but I don't know. But let's just call him Frankenstein. Frankenstein, of course, is the doctor who creates this monster, and it's quite interesting that when you hear the name Frankenstein, you immediately think of monster. And usually if you think in terms of the book, it's because I think Frankenstein is really the true monster. And in some cases, the Henry Frankenstein in the movie, he does have that kind of monstrous bit. I mean, you can clearly see he's in over his head, and just his obsession with creating life is definitely there at the beginning of the movie. Although, I will say that as the movie progresses, and once the monster is, you know, living and breathing and all that sort of thing, I feel as though Frankenstein is just less interesting. Again, this is probably because of the amazing performance of Boris Karloff. I don't necessarily blame the actor who played Frankenstein, it's just that it's one of those things where one element is just so good it just overshadows the other. But the best portrayal of Victor Frankenstein, in my opinion, is definitely the one in Penny Dreadful. I think what decides it for me is the fact that I love the fact that they cast someone who looks kind of young, and he plays him like he's young, so it's sort of like he's playing a kid that's way over his head. And I have to admit, the scene where the first monster, because we find out that there's more than one monster, is just one of the best scenes in the entire series. It's pretty much as though it's the imagery from the Frankenstein novel. I know I'm going into imagery here, but the reaction of Victor Frankenstein is just how I imagined when reading the original Frankenstein novel. And I really like the fact that they really toy with the fact that Victor is all about science and not about religion, as religion and science play a big part in Penny Dreadful. He definitely does not believe in religion and only looks to logic. But there's another thing that he doesn't believe in. He seems to have let go of all the emotions, which is a great contrast to the monster. But of course, this goes with a reason. Victor Frankenstein sadly lost a lot of people and a lot of friends that he loved very young as a child. He lost his dog and his mother pretty much the same day. So you can understand why he decided to emotionally distance himself from everything, because he knows that everything that you're going to love is going to eventually die, and that's what starts his obsession with bringing the dead back to life, or trying to find that boundary between life and death. It's just fascinating. But I like the fact that in season 2, this is where we start to see Victor Frankenstein actually show emotions, and this is towards the newly resurrected Bride of Frankenstein, which I won't dare spoil who the Bride of Frankenstein is or what happens in that story, but let's just say it's pretty good. In Dracula, on the other hand, because Dracula rarely shows up, mainly what happens through the story is basically what happens to the supporting characters. And the main difference is that we see is Renfield. And as I said, because the performance was really interesting and just seeing that change, not in just acting wise, but appearances, to me, it's just more interesting to watch because it just shows how much power Dracula has. So I think, yeah, that's what we're going with. We're going with Renfield in this one. But of course, we got a few more characters to look at. Here's supporting characters. Okay, so this is kind of weird to talk about because in Frankenstein, there's not really that many characters, or at least interesting characters. even from the book. I mean, okay, I think the most we ever get is mainly Elizabeth, which is Frankenstein's fiancée and soon-to-be wife, and Frankenstein's father, and his servant Igor, of course. And while some of the characters don't appear in the book, I don't know, they're just not that interesting to me. Again, it's mainly because and this is no fault of the movie, of course, because the main focus of the story is Frankenstein and the monster, even in the book. I mean, the book supporting characters are not that interesting either, but the only difference is that we actually witness a lot more deaths in the book, and, you know, the obsession of it's what makes Victor finally decide, and his obsession of killing what he created. In the movie, however, they really put the focus on Victor, or Henry, and the monster, and it just overshadows the supporting characters, and they're just not that interesting, to be honest. But that's no fault. I mean, that's just the kind of story we were telling. The supporting characters in Dracula, on the other hand, is pretty much what makes the story. I mean, of course, you got Dracula's power, and of course, Bela Lugosi is great. But the thing that really defies the atmosphere of the story is, the fact that Dracula's always there, and it's always the terrified reactions of these supporting characters. I mean, especially from Lucy and Mina, who are two girls, and the ones who are pretty much victims to Dracula, and yeah, for one of them you see a change, and then the other is trying hard to resist. In fact, one of the things that's very interesting about Dracula, and I think that's probably why sexuality is a main theme in Dracula nowadays, is because his victims don't even resist. I mean, and yeah, he's pretty much after women. So when the book was published, the idea of a stranger coming in through a woman's bedroom, it was kind of erotic for some readers, I'm not gonna lie. And I can slightly see that in a strange, weird way. But as I said, the supporting characters really make the story, as it just shows on how much power Dracula has over them, and just showing their reactions. And again, going back to Van Helsing, trying to figure out who and what Dracula is it's interesting, and I really like it. I particularly love the scene when he sees that Dracula has no reflection in the mirror, and when he shows the mirror to him, he immediately slams it down, and I really like that, both from Dr. Van Helsing and from Dracula. I mean, I thought the performance was really good in that particular scene, it just stood out for me. As far as supporting characters go in Penny Dreadful, it's really hard to kind of talk about. I mean, in Frankenstein, we don't really get any kind of characters from the actual book or the movie. In fact, the most we resemble is the bride of Frankenstein, which again, I won't spoil for you. The main focus is, of course, Victor and the monster, as it should be. Maybe they might introduce some new characters in season 3, who knows? I mean, I've only just seen the trailer, and it looks freaking awesome. But, who knows? In fact, maybe it might be quite interesting if they introduce Elizabeth to this story, because for those of you who have keeping up with the story and how emotionally distanced Victor Frankenstein is, it'd be interesting to have his true love finally show up, particularly from what's happened in season 2. So, As far as Dracula, on the other hand, there are precise characters, especially Mina Harker. Or she starts off as Mina Murray. However, she's really there for season 1 and only briefly in season 2. Again, I won't say what exactly happens to her, but you can tell there are a few resemblance between her and in the book. It's the fact that she's a very innocent character, and so when this horrifying things happen to her, it's pretty terrifying. And they've slightly, briefly mentioned Jonathan Harker, but I don't know. Maybe he could show up in season 3 as well. I'm not sure. Again, I don't know where the show's going. I mean, season 2 left on a pretty big cliffhanger, but who knows where it's gonna go. So, yeah, because they actually helped the story through, I gotta give the point to Dracula here. No contest. But this is gonna be really hard. Let's look at imagery. Okay, so this is really, really hard because, and this is the thing that is dying more and more as films goes on is that horror films back in the day, they knew how to make atmosphere. In fact, I'd be surprised, most horror films that actually do get a lot of atmosphere nowadays mainly gets it from these two films. Or the Hammer horror films, of course. But, you know, Dracula was part of them. I mean, you got Christopher Lee, and he's a legend. So, anyway, basically what I'm trying to say is that these movies definitely have atmosphere written all over them. I mean, they're pretty much movies that you want to sit in the dark, you know, alone, just to get the full atmosphere. I mean, that's how great it is. And of course the black and white really does add to it. I mean, these feel like stories that were made in black and white. Though, as Alex will suggest, I mean, the imagery in Penny Dreadful really does help the stories as well. But really, this is probably why a lot of remakes and retellings kind of fall flat, is because these stories are just black and white colors. I mean, when you say Frankenstein and Dracula, you immediately think of the black and white versions. I mean, at least in my opinion anyway, but you know. In fact, even like films like, I mean, even if we talk about films like Ed Wood and Frankenweenie, I mean, Frankenweenie, because it was a love letter to monster movies, it only made sense to make it in black and white, plus it was, you know, faithful to the original short. And Ed Wood, because the way that made Martin Landau look like Bela Lugosi was to put him in black and white, and that's the reason why it became it in the first place. But honestly, after seeing Ed Wood, you can't imagine that film unless it's in black and white. So, you know, that worked out perfectly. So, again, it's really hard. And even though that Penny Dreadful is shown in color, you know, but the imagery is just spectacular. In fact, the best way I can describe the imagery in Penny Dreadful is it kind of looks like Sweeney Todd. And as you guys might have seen in my Sweeney Todd review, the imagery is absolutely gorgeous. I think the thing that does it is that it's both dark but very beautiful to look at, and definitely creates atmosphere. I mean, like, wow, this is one of the most atmospheric TV shows I have ever seen in my entire life. Even from just little things, from the editing to the detail of the blood to shadows, everything. It is just spectacular to watch. I've already mentioned briefly about how the Frankenstein monster was created. Again, it is pretty much how it is in the book. They don't really give you how the monster was suddenly born. They literally just cut to a shot where the monster is suddenly awake and he is screaming in agony because of how much pain he's in. But of course to Victor, he feels that it is threatening and absolutely is terrified, and he runs off, just leaving the monster in pain. Nice one, Victor. But at the same time, this is the exact same scene that I imagined when I was reading the book. And I don't know what else to say. It's just stunning. From the moment that the monster is born, to the moment the Bride of Frankenstein is born, the atmosphere of where you think the devil is there or not, the possession. I mean, Eva Green's performance when she's possessed by the devil, that was one of the most frightening things I've ever seen. And I'm not even joking. Like, you know. Again, much like the 30s black and white films, it is a kind of show that you want to watch in the dark with the lights off. I mean, it's just that atmosphere. You gotta get in the moment to watch this kind of show. And when I say that, let's just say that I think, even though I'm not exactly controlling over the ratings. In fact, most of the time I think it's either overrated or underrated as far as, you know, ratings go. But yeah, I think this program deserves its R-rated. I mean, let's face it, nothing is left to the imagination. Nothing. And that's absolutely great. I think what decides it for me, though, is the imagery throughout the entire story. And this is where Dracula kind of falls for me. The imagery in Dracula is absolutely spectacular at the beginning, especially when you see the castle. I mean, wow. That's great atmosphere. And even in the book, the greatest atmosphere is in the castle. I mean, just the sheer size of it, just the shadows, it's absolutely beautiful. However, when it gets to London, the imagery just kind of dies down for me. I mean, yeah, it looks absolutely rich and beautiful, but then, I don't know, it just sort of loses it. Again, it's that same thing where one element was just so good, it just overshadows the other. Frankenstein's imagery throughout is really, really good, and especially from, you know, the effects that they had at that time, since filmmaking was still pretty new at the time. You know, especially the talkies. You know, I mean, the use of electricity and just the scenes all around. I think it does dwell into the whole science versus nature, or nature versus nurture, and it certainly does come through in the imagery. In fact, a lot of horror movies usually relate to Frankenstein first rather than Dracula. So I think because the imagery, I mean, you know, we're trying to think of just the imagery of the cemetery, or, you know, Frankenstein's lair, or, you know, just the woods where the monster is roaming around, or the village, or the windmill. I mean, these are images that just pop up in my head every time I think of the movie. So I think it's because throughout the movie you're thinking of how wonderful it looks. I don't know, it just... And again, as Boris Karloff's performance is pretty much silent, yeah, that kind of counts as imagery, doesn't it? So I think Frankenstein gets the point here. Oh my god, and now it comes to the real hard part. Story. Let's have a look. Again, it's so hard because both these stories are both so iconic in not just the world of cinema, but also in the world of literature. I mean, for you guys that haven't read the books, I highly, highly, highly recommend them. I mean, they are so good. I mean, yeah, they're absolutely wonderful. But for those who haven't seen the movies, definitely see the movies as well, even though they are very different from the books, but that's beside the point. So, oh my god, okay, let's have a look. We've got Dracula, which is about a blood-sucking vampire who is just so powerful, and, you know, his presence is there throughout the story, versus a story about resurrecting from the dead. It's really hard to decide. In fact, actually, let's go over to Alex and, you know, talk about the story in Penny Dreadful. It's too hard. It's hard to talk about the story since pretty much both the Frankenstein and the Dracula one kind of intertwine. The Dracula story, of course, intertwines with the original story that's happening with Vanessa Ives, Ethan Chandler, and Malcolm Murray, whereas Frankenstein does relate to the original story as well as the picture of Dorian Gray, as seen in season 2. And I mean, the way they tie in with each other is just fantastic. I mean, really what Penny Dreadful is just a celebration of these fantastic novels of horror. And I think one of the greatest things of the show is that I have witnessed people who have no interest in the horror genre, and yet somehow through this show, they realize that there's more to horror than meets the eye. And yeah, that's pretty much what the show is. It indicates a lot of life themes, and this is what horror does. It just takes it to the extreme a little bit. But this is one of the things that makes Penny Dreadful great, and is certainly a faithful celebration of these amazing stories. And so, for you horror lovers and you monster lovers out there, check it out, you won't regret it. Okay, I think what decides it for me is I think what decides it for me, and this is very, very slim, is the idea and the themes. Now obviously when you think of Dracula, you automatically think of vampires, blood, power, Transylvania, things like that. It's a very, very specific story. The theme, or the main thing that I think, is some kind of new threat that comes over to your homeland and, like I said, threatens it. And during the time when Bram Stoker's Dracula novel was released, this is when technology started to get, you know, actually started coming up. So in a sense there's that sort of thing where technology is this new threat among us, and it sort of hypnotizes us. We're sort of enchanted by it, but it's dangerous. And this is actually something that relates to nowadays. And I think that's why a lot of people in that way still respond to this story, because it relates to modern day life, oddly enough. But then that also goes for Frankenstein as well. Mary Shelley pretty much wrote this story as a kind of, this is what, the idea of technology and people, you know, exploring science and thinking there's more to this world than just religion. And then she thinks, well, the step that goes too far is if you're trying to play God and actually make a person. And yeah, and showing the absolute dangers of what that can do. And so again, it pretty much shows the threat of science. It's interesting and intriguing, but a threat nonetheless. And this is something that definitely relates to something like technology or social media or something, and, you know, am I glad that we have stuff like this? Sure, but there's still always a threat wherever you go. So both these stories really do have very, very timeless themes, and this is just why they are just so popular. But I think what decides it for me is, again, this is just personal reasons, and I think the story of resurrecting a person to life is just so fascinating. I mean, Dracula is a fascinating story, but then I think it's mainly to do with the themes. I think with Frankenstein, it's not just the themes, it's just the concept, the imagery, the performances, the characters, and it's just, I don't know how to explain it. I mean, you could say that it's inspired a lot of, you know, it's inspired a lot, this particular story. And Dracula has nonetheless, but mainly for the vampire genre, and that led to Twilight. So, you know. But I still love Dracula, I still love vampires, as long as it's been told right. Thank you, Dark Shadows, and thank you, Christopher Lee. But I think Frankenstein is just a theme that's just so interesting, and I think of the fact that is that it can be interpreted in many different ways as well. I mean, my favorite film has the idea. I mean, it's about an inventor who creates life, but it's an unfinished creation. That's the new part, and I love that. It's unfinished. Oh, poor Edward. Don't cry. Don't cry. Don't. But I think, yeah, that just decides it to me. So, by very, very, very slim chance, I am going to make Frankenstein the better story and therefore the better movie. Well, I have to admit, Alex, thanks for putting your input for Penny Dreadful. That was quite interesting. I think that was quite good. Yeah, we should do this again sometime. You just want to dress up again, don't you? What? I hardly get to dress up. This is nice for me. Okay. We'll see. We'll see. Okay. Yeah, okay, fine. Anyway, thanks for joining me, guys, and I hope to see you again soon. Bye!